Cool. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Very excited for this. And this is probably the second or third iteration of this webinar that we've done. And there's just been a lot of excitement around Notion Consulting, and the idea of starting as a side hustle is something that I did. So I'll go in a little bit more detail on my experience getting started. And hopefully that gives you some context as to how you can hopefully get started as well. But we'll get into that. Couple things to note, if this is the first time we're connecting, my name's Dave DeCespedes. I'm in Miami, Florida. So you all said where you're from. I've been a certified Notion consultant for a little over 2 years now. And as a little bit of background, I started just making very niche YouTube videos, tutorial videos on Notion, like how to embed a toggle timer and how to organize, how to create a journal database. Very basic things that for me at the time, I was actually teaching full time. It was in the middle of the pandemic. Just started making YouTube videos, and that led to writing a little bit more about Notion stuff and new features. And then that led to essentially going through the process of becoming a certified consultant. But it was a long process. And through the time, that was probably around a year and a half of teaching full time while I was just exploring the space, getting a sense of just following curiosity. Notion and operations and productivity was something that I was just drawn to from my own struggles with productivity that just led to consulting. But for a lot of us, thinking through how do we get started, that's a question that came up quite a bit for those of you who sent in some questions. So we have some kind of resources to hopefully get started. And
Nice.
okay, agenda. What are we covering today? So why start as a side hustle versus just diving right into a new space or a new type of product or service or business? Specifics on Notion Consulting, why there's still a huge market and a huge demand just from what I've seen and the changes that I've seen over the past year or so specifically. The COLE model, we're going to get into this terrible shortening acronym for this exercise. So if you've got any ideas at the end of this, I'd love to hear it. Hopefully I can replace that. And then a little bit about a course that's coming up. It's a live 4-week intensive Notion Consulting Bootcamp course. It's the second one. We did our first one last October. So we have some super exciting changes that are happening and a very exciting announcement on what's different for this time around. And then we'll have some time for Q&A just to get a sense of if there's any questions in addition to the ones that were sent prior. Okay, so why start a side hustle? There's a key thing that happens when we're starting any business, and it's always a very high risk experience. Specifically, who's our market? What is our product or service? And is this a viable business moving forward that's long-term that we could continue doing as a side hustle or potentially do full time? So as I mentioned, it was probably a 6-month period before I decided to jump in full time after I had roughly around 4 recurring projects. So it was enough to at least replace my teaching salary at the time. So that was one of the requirements for me personally. So this is different for everybody, depending on your target audience and your service. Second is exploring a specific product or service. When it comes to Notion, this could be paid templates. This could be workshops, training, optimizing workspaces. There's a lot of variety when it comes to Notion. And so being able to kind of experiment, getting feedback, and really getting a sense of if there's enough demand that you think would warrant investing more time and energy into. And the last one, which is also something that we could forget, but is also important, is just our interest. Is it an audience that we like interfacing with, interacting with, meeting with? I'd say over the past couple of years, working with design agencies has been really fun. Having studied architecture and worked in architecture, that just like resonates with me personally, where you get to work with teams that are doing the work that you used to do, but you're helping them out in a very different way. So things like that, trying to mash all these things together and giving ourselves a little bit of flexibility to explore and experiment before jumping in full time. So one other thing to note is there are no shortcuts, unfortunately, to building a sustainable business, especially if it's a service business. This is something that I've noticed a lot on social media, especially Twitter, where creators are make 6 figures a month and make money while you're sleeping. And There's definitely scenarios where we can get to that point, and I'm not saying that's impossible. However, the process to get there takes several years of consistent building, content creation, building an audience, and creating products or services that connect and resonate with that specific audience. So there's a lot of moving pieces in the background that lead to that. And those first stages are essentially starting out as side hustles. So if we're at phase one, that's where we're experimenting and getting a sense of where is there a viable business here. And then this also brings up this conversation that was happening also on Twitter that I thought was super interesting, but it was a tweet from Mr. Beast. It was basically talking about a lot of people just like dropping what they're doing, quitting their jobs, and just jumping into starting their own thing without much of a foundation. And that being super risky and also setting us up for failure in a lot of cases. So the side hustle is a way to make extra income, but it's also a way to launch your new thing while you're still in your current role. So for me, it was teaching and carving out little bits of time that I had. I was fortunate to have extra time, not having to commute to my school because of the pandemic and because of remote learning. So that gave me back a few hours per day. And so it goes back to how much time and energy do we have to invest in this to get a sense of what's a realistic goal, which brings us to the next part, which is understanding our capacity. So because all of our situations are different, whether maybe if you're like me, you have kids or you're in school or you have a full-time role or you're commuting or not commuting, there's all these different variables, but really starting with what is our capacity for this side hustle. So specifically time related, but also energy. If you're getting up at 5 a.m. every morning to commute and you're clocking out at 6 p.m., even though you have 3 hours a day, you might not really be able to put all those 3 hours into your side hustle. So it's really understanding, okay, what can I realistically do within the time and energy that I have? And starting there to decide what can you create, what can you share via social media to build in public and just get feedback on what you're doing, especially at that early stage. Want to pivot to Notion Consulting specifically. Notion Consulting is a very interesting space that I've noticed consultants are still educating potential clients on the fact that Notion Consulting exists to begin with, that you could hire somebody to come into your workspace and help people work smarter or work faster, and educating clients on the structure, because within the 70 or 80 so odd certified consultants globally, there's a lot of different models because this is a new space. Some consultants are focusing on training, on individual workshops. I like to start every engagement with an audit process, which we'll get into, and I'll share a resource on. That's my cheat code for Notion Consulting. And post audit, lining up sprints. So it's like, what can we do in 2-week modules to make an impact on the team's work and workflows? And that always changes for every client. Again, that's one model. That's one of many. Couple things to keep in mind, and this number is probably higher by now because this data is roughly a year old, but there's at least probably 35 to 40 million Notion users globally. Of course, a lot of these users have created a free workspace, are young students, individuals, solopreneurs, but a lot of these and more of these are small teams, growing teams, and enterprise businesses that are using Notion and definitely need support, not only building their workspace, but managing it, maintaining it, ensuring that employees have a good understanding of how to navigate, what are the norms and expectations across their team, especially for hybrid or remote teams. This could be very nebulous where you join a team and there's no real clarity on what are we organizing where, what are the expectations around meetings, around documents, keeping them up to date. So a lot of times teams would just prefer to have somebody externally come in and set the tone, make some recommendations on what to change. And so that it kind of kickstarts these expectations for the team going forward when it comes to Notion. And one other thing that I've also noticed, because when I started out, my goal was to work with Series C and Series D startups that had raised 50 million, 100 million, because for me, that meant a bigger budget. That meant a bigger team, a lot more details to figure out for the client. But what I found is that two things. Number one, companies in tech or with employees that are very tech savvy tend to do okay with Notion. There's always areas to optimize, but when it comes to setting up automations or integrating with other tools, usually there's somebody internally that can take that on. Found that there's demand there, but when you move out of tech and you go into other industries, a lot of which are just becoming aware of Notion, and I'm thinking of architecture, thinking of education, thinking of the nonprofit space. These are all, and just coming from companies that are booking discovery calls and getting up and running in Notion, feel like moving forward, looking ahead to the next 2-3 years, there's going to be growing demand in these other industries that are finding Notion and then identifying, hey, this is a good space and a good solution for organizing all of our team's information and knowledge. Something to keep in mind, and one area that's been top of mind for me has been architecture firms, primarily because there's a high volume of small firms. This is like 5-10 people that don't really have set norms in place when it comes to software, apart from like creating drawings and creating 3D renderings. When it comes to the project management side, the tools that are out there are not great. And when you compare it to a tool like Notion, where you can control how it looks and feels and personalize it to fit a company's brand and identity, that's an exciting part that I'm trying to explore a little bit more going into the rest of the year. So a little bit on Cole. First, capacity. How much time and energy do we have to commit? So if you have 5 hours a week, that's an hour a day. I like to use the 20-20-60 rule. So if you've got 60% of your time just in building mode, building an idea for a service, building a product in Notion, this could be like templates, 20% content, which the thing I always suggest is just share what you're building. If you're creating something, take a screenshot, clean it up, and post it, and start there, because social media can become pretty overwhelming and pretty daunting, but at least sharing something out there and opening it up to conversation. And the other 20% is conversation, getting feedback, getting people that you know or people that you've connected with online to say, hey, what do you think about this? Can I send this over to you? So starting with capacity and then moving to offer. So specifically, what product or service would be most valuable? So when we think about side hustles, a lot of times we start with things that we would love to do full time and kind of our dream job, but we often forget, like, where is there a need and where is there a demand for a thing that you could make or offer to that target client or customer? So this is where getting that feedback is really critical. Just for me, those early discovery calls where people would reach out from like a YouTube video that I posted a year and a half prior that was just like in my dad's attic. So it was just like really low quality. But every conversation, using that as an opportunity to say, hey, is this valuable? Is this useful? If not, what would be valuable? And just collecting those pieces of feedback and pieces of notes to then make sure that whatever we end up launching is at least has some backing, which goes to the assessing, making sure that we're getting that feedback and it's not just us creating in a silo, being working from home or working remote. It's very easy to get disconnected from people and from communities, getting that feedback and then launching. So again, with the side hustle, because especially if we have a full-time role or you have existing income, it relieves a lot of the pressure to launch, where you could put something out there, get feedback. If it doesn't work, repeat the same process and do it again. And I'd say over the last 2 years, I've shifted from trying to sell services on a monthly retainer basis to a project basis. And now I'm focusing on the workflow audit for everybody, followed by a sprint roadmap where everybody's roadmap is different. Might be going back to a monthly fee. So there's a lot of experimentation involved. And it's really just as you get a better sense from clients and customers, that's going to affect the strategy of the business. I wanted to give us 3 ways to get started. And I've got a resource that I'll share specifically on the audit to hopefully that you can take in your own direction and hopefully use with clients. So first, templates. I'm sure, give me a quick yes or no in the chat if you've come across, created, or seen somebody make a Notion template anywhere online on the interwebs. So if you're like me, you probably have. If not, you'll see it soon. But again, something that's super unique to Notion, the ability to create a template, to market it, and to generate leads, to generate income. It's a relatively new product category. Before this, things like ebooks or things like guides or playbooks that were essentially PDFs was the only kind of parallel to it. But even though there is a market for generating revenue solely from Notion templates, this is also something that we cover in the course. My personal take on it is that the amount of time and effort that it takes to build an audience, to then have enough template sales to essentially replace your income or get to that target, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy. It could take years to get to that point, and it's really about audience building. So you're really maximizing how can I grow my audience as quickly as possible so that I could get this template in front of more people. And then it's essentially a numbers game. When it comes to a side hustle where we're thinking of services or training or workshops or working with companies, and it's really hands-on and it's people oriented, templates for me fit a better role, and that's in generating leads. So for example, if I'm targeting architecture firms, first thing I'm going to do is think through what's a template or guide that I could share as a free resource, share it with my network, have them ask them to share with their networks to essentially raise awareness around, hey, here's what you can do in Notion, and here's the clear effects that it could have on your business. To build an email list, to introduce the product, myself and the product or service to that new person. And then lastly, and most importantly, when there's a product or service that I'm ready to launch, I have that list that I could reach out to and say, hey, would you be willing to jump on a call and discuss this? For me, templates are a great way to get started. Again, you could have a free version, have a paid version, and maybe experiment that way. And that's also before consulting, that's where I got into Notion, was selling a template called Manifest OS. I don't know if you've seen it, but still generates revenue, but is not necessarily a core focus considering working with clients. Second is just offering discovery calls, just having a link, having people book time, and just getting one-on-one. These are super critical conversations and opportunities to get a sense of where are people struggling with Notion and where are their common threads from people from different companies and different industries. I still have a link available to anyone that asks for it. Again, they might have to wait several days or maybe a few weeks just based on the hectic schedule this year, but still leaving it open because it's essentially research and development. As a consultant, as a side hustler, you want to get a sense of like where there's demand. And this goes back to the Cole or Gray's LOCA acronym. You can use either one. Third one, workflow audits. And I'm going to share this. I'm going to share a link to this free resource that is going to be available to everybody. But workflow audits have been super critical to just to do two things, which I'm really excited about. One, you make sure that your clients, the problems that the client is bringing up are actually the problems that the company is facing. So you might find that they think, hey, we just need a project management system. And then you go in and there's problems with onboarding or there's problems with consistency across teams. And you start to unearth all of these other issues and then come to the conclusion, hey, we actually might want to prioritize onboarding for new hires before we touch project management. So it's an opportunity to prioritize and make sure that the work that's being done, it has a big effect on the company and on productivity. That's, again, my personal experience. Two is the workflow audit, which companies have been surprisingly willing to pay for, is your first introduction and your first paid engagement with that client, which makes it way easier to propose a longer term engagement afterward. So rewinding a year, I would send proposals for, hey, it's $5,000 for a 2-month workspace build. And it seems like a high number for a small team. And there's a lot of question marks. We just met on a discovery call the previous day. There's a lot of hesitation there. Whereas I just say, hey, this is a $1,000 audit and it's a 2-week process and you don't have to sign on for future sprints or future engagements. You could take the workspace roadmap that we build in the audit, And if you have somebody internally that wants to build it, they can go ahead and build it, and that's totally fine. And nobody's ever taken it and tried to build it themselves, basically. So it's a great way to deepen the relationship and make sure that you're delivering value and you give the client more of an opportunity to share where the issues are, where the pain points are. So to switch gears as to what this looks like, because I'm going to share this on the screen just so you can get a quick sense of what it looks like. Maybe if you use it, by all means, it's yours to use and remix however you want. So workflow audit, this is basically a collection of all the questions that have come up with clients pretty much over the past 2 years, covering everything from understanding their industry, if it's an industry I'm not familiar with, what do workflows look like? So if you expand any one of these sections, it's diving deep onto specific questions like, are workflows documented? And if so, where are they documented? Are they in different places? Do we have some in Google Drive and Dropbox on somebody's laptop? Things like readiness for change. I always tell clients that Notion Consulting is 10% building and 90% getting teams comfortable and confident in the updated workspaces and workflows that are being implemented, largely because people are coming in with feelings. Some people are super excited to use Notion. Some people have no idea what it is, and they just joined the company a few days ago, and everything in between. Having time and space to talk about like how ready is a team for these changes is a pretty critical part to determine long-term, is this workspace going to be sustainable and is going to grow and improve over time versus we're going to make all these changes, we're going to roll them out, and then 3 months later, everybody kind of abandons it. So things like, what is the team's familiarity? How willing are they to change? And this is where you start to get like clients letting the ideas flow and jotting down all the notes and ideas and things that have come up over the past weeks or months, which is pretty essential information as somebody outside of a company trying to get a sense of, hey, what is the situation here and how can we fix it? And then also looking forward, this is like also something we cover in the course, but planting the seed of what is the temperature level for long-term support? Are they thinking about it as we just need this thing built and then we'll take it over? Or have they thought about somebody coming in and helping and supporting long-term? Maybe it's through a support model or like as needed. So there's a lot of different things here, but this kind of started out as a quick like 3 or 4 bullet point thing when I started consulting and then just grew over time. One other thing to note is we don't cover all of these things for every client. So there might be stuff, if it's an industry that I'm familiar with, I might gloss over things and I might say, hey, for this key area, maybe let's focus or prioritize a little bit more in our like live meetings, but just something to get a sense of, because this is, I would say today, this is probably the easiest offer or service to get someone to sign on with, because the ticket price is not super high. You get some time with the client, and it's almost like an interview process that you're part getting paid for and part trying to plant the seeds for a longer term engagement or a deeper engagement. And if you find that it's not a client that you want to work with, it's very easy to pivot away from the project. You can say, hey, this is a roadmap that I built. Probably makes sense to bring in, if you have other people that you can recommend, great. And then that way you could slide the project to somebody else and seek out the projects that you do want to take on. Okay, cool. So I'm going to pull back up the slides because I got some cool stuff to share. And then I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. Before we talk about the course, last thing I want to leave you with, another tweet. I love this is from yesterday, but you can essentially do 4 things. You can save people time, save people money, make people money, or make people happy. So I'd say, just reflecting, I'd say I'm somewhere in between number 1 and number 4, because if people are doing things faster, they can save time. And if they know where to look and they don't get confused and don't get overwhelmed in their workspace, then I would assume that they're happier. Okay, Notion Consulting Bootcamp, I wanted to share a quick thing because this is the second cohort. First one was last October. It was an awesome experience. We had 34 people in total, which my goal was 10 because it was the first course I was doing that was live, that wasn't just like a self-paced, like you buy it and then you get some videos and resources. And I know some of these people are here and some are not, but we have some exciting changes for 2.0 that's kicking off April, I believe April 22nd, that I'm really excited about and is really going to take it into a new direction. And the main thing is we have 4 amazing guest speakers in this second cohort. So throughout the 4 weeks, every week we're getting a certified Notion consultant coming in, talking about their business model, their experience, things that they found to be super critical for launching your own Notion consulting business. And again, these are all consultants that have been around longer than I have. And at some point, I was looking to for guidance and mentorship. So the fact that all 4 of them were joining is pretty amazing. And I'd say one big change from cohort 1 to this cohort is highlighting the different possible models for building a Notion consulting business. Because it factors in so many different things, each of these 4 people and myself all have different business models. So highlighting that and really ending the course with a clear idea of, hey, here's the direction that you want to go and the audience that you want to target, and being able to get exposure to that, and also just that one-on-one time with 5 consultants, myself included. And then a couple details to keep in mind. It's a 4-week period from April 22nd to May 17th. There's 4 core sessions. There's 4 guest speakers. There's 2 office hour sessions. So as we're doing asynchronous exercises, having some time to jump on Zoom and hash out some questions and some ideas. Also new is a Consultant OS template. This is taking a lot of the systems that I've built over the past 2 years, specifically CRM, client management portal, and just a task manager, which is bringing in and consolidating all the action items across clients. That's going to be part of cohort 2. And this is specifically for this webinar group. There's also going to be a 1-hour strategy session for anybody who signs up. Again, that's only for people who are here. I'm going to share it in the webinar recap email, but this is not going to be available for the larger launch when enrollment opens March 31st. So something to keep in mind there. And I don't know if people scan QR codes, but I'm going to drop the link to the sign up. If you are interested, you could drop that in, and I'll also send that in the email. But yeah, very excited for this. Again, got really good feedback on the last one and a lot of takeaways and ideas that we're carrying into this one. So it's going to be a fun time. So let's switch gears to Q&A. And once I've got the Q&A slide open, we'll get into that. And I'm actually just going to open my notes page. Cool. I saw some questions in the chat. I did want to cover a few questions that were dropped into the form so that we could talk about those a little bit. And yeah, and then we'll open it up for questions. Love the questions that were submitted in advance. Awesome. So getting started in a practical way. Again, I had a full-time job, was teaching, and just started with creating content and going through the consultant process. I know the process has changed quite a bit. There's 3 levels of exams and it's a little bit more convoluted, but essentially starting there and then just sharing on social media, not really having a strategy, just sharing what I'm working on or what I'm building or things that I'm interested in or reading about, and just starting there. And then as we're getting more clear about what a product or service might work and for which audience, seeking out people to get feedback, and even going as far as, like, for those first few projects, offering to do it at a discount or do some for free just to get the feedback and hopefully get a testimonial that's going to build trust with future audiences. So that's probably where I would start with that first one. Continuous work. I'm not going to lie, this one is a tough one. I'd say last year was a really strong start to this year. It died down. It fluctuates based on the economy. Thankfully, this year has been really good. But I go back to the audit idea because it's low risk on the client side. And in the scenario that you have a couple of big projects fall through, you can still promote the audit and still generate revenue that hopefully replaces those larger projects. And again, it's a form of lead generation that you're getting paid for. But this also highlights the importance of building an audience, creating content. Audience doesn't have to be a massive in the millions of people, but the key thing is that they're engaged and that they are excited about the work that you're doing. Even if it's 100 people, that's super valuable. And in terms of building, this is a detailed question, but I typically create a dashboard in my own workspace. And then when we start building, I essentially start building in the client's workspace just to highlight what this looks like. So hiding some stuff here, but I'd say the best example is, so for each client, they get essentially these 5 or 4 key areas. Ideas is just a place to capture like questions that come up from the client, follow-ups to things that we're building. Tracking meeting notes has been super important to just keep track of what we're doing when. And then things like just these are all templatized from my end. So if we have an audit, these are the kind of key actions that are happening. And then any documents or resources sharing with them here so that they could, hopefully duplicate to their workspace. Project management happens in my workspace, and then the actual building stuff happens in their workspace. So something to keep in mind there. And then if we go back to after certification, yeah, advertising, if you have a template or something like a course that doesn't require hands-on, that's a scenario where you can advertise and target specific audiences. For consulting, it's using a template to build your email list and move from that to discovery calls and then just connect with those potential clients. So hopefully that answers that question. And who to target, that's a very personal question. It's based on your network, your expertise, groups or industries that you're excited about working with, and seeing where those all overlap into a space that you have companies that you'd be excited to work with and that have the budget to pay you. And regarding the certification, I would say you don't need it. It's definitely nice to have and good to have. I know there's a backlog of applications, and Notion's been making some changes where they've got the exam process that anybody could go through those 3 certification exams, which are the precursors to the certification process, which is there's like an interview involved and there's showing a portfolio of work. So definitely those first 3 exams are really helpful to have and also help to build trust, even if you're waiting to join the consultant directory. So I would definitely recommend that. Broader ecosystem of apps, I'd say that the ones that have come up most often are related to automation, specifically Make and Zapier. In some cases, we've looked at syncing to other like project management systems like Jira or Trello, but I'd say more often than not, it's setting up automations to bring in information from different tools or vice versa. And so that's been a learning process because setting up automations is not the easiest and it takes some practice. Thanks for those. And then just going to go one by one. So starting with Aaron's, how do you charge? Workflow audit was a flat fee. And just for context, workflow audit started as like an experiment where I'm like, I'm just going to charge $500. And then 3 clients in a row said yes. And then I just gradually upped the number and it's still saying yes. So that's good. And that's typically a 2-week period. But once you have the process and you've done the process, it's not a very heavy lift because you're really just reviewing existing workspaces if they exist and just putting together recommendations. And the most amount of time is really spent on building out the roadmap for the client. But again, a lot of this is once you build it once, you can take bits and pieces. In some cases, I'll offer hourly rates for previous clients if they have questions that come up throughout but are don't quite have the budget for a retainer, then I might do that, but I'd say not across the board. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, so dates, it's going to be April 22nd to May 17th. So that 4-week period. The meeting dates are going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays. This is also something I'm going to share in more detail in the email. And the tentative meeting dates is going to be at 12 p.m. Eastern. I know for some of us, it's like a terrible time, but factoring in like morning time on the West Coast in the US and people in, east of the US having some flexibility there where it's like evening, but hopefully not too late. So I will say that a lot of the materials are managed via Circle, which is our community tool. And there's also video content and content that referencing there so that the meeting times are really just diving into the details and leveraging group work and also connecting and networking in the course. Cool. Serena asks, you also learn how to work with Notion and make templates, dashboards. Yes, a lot of stuff. Again, once you build things once, it makes it a lot easier to build in the future where you're just making refinements. And over time, over every project, you get a better sense of what teams' preferences are and in terms of like, how do you show databases and how far do you go with formulas? When I first started, I would get super excited about really complicated dashboards, and just it's gotten more minimal and more simple as time has gone on, just because it's like, can somebody that's brand new to Notion navigate this effectively and work their way around the workspace? So yeah, and in some cases, they've turned into templates where you build something and then you take a piece of it and think that it might be a good resource for other people. Yeah, so follow-up question. After the audit, pricing is on a sprint basis. This is also something that I'm like experimenting with, which are sprints are typically 2 weeks. So if I, at the end of the audit, put together a roadmap that's say 2 months, that's roughly 4 sprints where every sprint we're covering and delivering a specific area of the workspace just to move quickly, get feedback earlier in the process, and continue building that trust and make sure that the client knows what the priorities are and in what order. So you can also align on what's there. That's that pricing is a range. So the range is largely dependent on the company size. So if it's a small team, I'm on the lower end of the range. If it's a bigger team, on the higher end, just because there's more people in the conversation. There's more like deliberation. So there's just like more hours that go into it. But I'd say it's priced significantly higher than the audit, if that's helpful. And then we can chat in like more detail on that one. Yes, underestimating the work. The more prepared you can be, the better. And the goal of the roadmap is to make sure that there's clarity on what you're producing, what you're shipping, and what's not part of that scope. And focusing on the sprints just avoids the scope creep of, hey, we'd love to set up this automation. And then you can go back to the roadmap and say, okay, that's in sprint 3, and we really want to get sprint 1 launched. That's the learning. There's a learning curve with protecting against scope creep. And I'd say there's always clients that are on the more demanding side. So it's managing expectations there. And all right. And then, yeah, that's everything. Jill, not sure if I answered or if you were referring to the Notion page or the slides, but wasn't sure about that one. Oh, to Juan's question, charge per hour, I don't. It's all project based. Again, experimenting with a monthly fee base. So if we're doing 2 sprints a month, having that as a recurring fee, just to decrease the amount of like business development that you're doing, and you have more consistency across projects. I'd say when I started, it was like 100, 120 an hour, and doing it that way. So if that's helpful for context. Hours on the audit, it's a good question. I'd probably say 6 to 8 hours in total, factoring in reviewing the workspace, to check-ins with the client, building the workspace roadmap, asynchronous communication. I'd say around that time frame. And seeing the bootcamp session times, those are going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays at 12 p.m. Eastern on the East Coast of the US. So there's that one. And yeah, I think that might have been all of the questions. Just want to make sure. Oh, last one. Do I ever work with companies that never use Notion? In some cases, I would say it hasn't gone too well, to be honest. At least having one person internally that has used it, that has built a test workspace, has been helpful, just to make sure that there's enough kind of like investment there. Mostly because if some of the team is on board and some of the team isn't, it's not a great starting point for making sure that the team is going to be using and improving on the workspace long term. Yeah, something to keep in mind there. But not to say that it's impossible, but teams that are already in there and just need help has been the best. And then the very last one. So Lindsay, you get the last question. If you're missing live sessions, yes, 100%. The course is designed to make sure that all the resources are in the Circle space, that everybody's introing themselves the week before, so that everybody gets a sense of who's in the course. And the live sessions are really taking advantage of being there live and being able to connect with each other in small breakout rooms. That was probably the biggest feedback from the first cohort is everybody demanded more breakout rooms to connect with each other. That was really cool to see. But yeah, it's really just building on the resources that are in the course and in the Circle space. And you're getting access to all the previous cohorts, videos, and resources. Something to keep in mind there. On that note, hope that was helpful. I'm going to follow up with a few things, specifically the workflow audit template, the information about the course and details, and specifically like meeting times and dates, and a link for anybody who does want to sign up. Again, you get access to the 1-hour strategy session after the course, which is only going to be for people here and in the next webinar. So that's going to be capped. And yeah, in the meantime, I hope to connect with you somewhere on the interwebs, either via email, my email's in the event link, and I'll also be sending some follow-up emails on the course. So hope that was helpful. And on that note, have a great rest of your Tuesdays. See you, everybody.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Cheers.